So my Yakuza worst to best video is almost 5 years old, and I watched it back and I low-key don't really agree with almost anything I said in it. So I decided to redo the list, but this time with everything that's released since, and on top of that the games that I originally left out in the first video that have officially been released in English. Since that first video, I have replayed every single entry except for Fist of the North Star, so my memory has been fully refreshed and my thoughts are more fleshed out. Also, I just want to be clear that I'm not doing this because of the controversial response to the original video. In fact, the response was even better than I was expecting. I'm just doing this because I feel like enough time has passed. I was 16 when I made the first video. I'm 20, almost 21 now, so my opinions have changed dramatically. An update is warranted and people will still definitely disagree with this list, and that's completely okay. This video will also remain spoiler free, so certain plot specific points won't be touched on, but I will imply my thoughts clear enough for those who have played the game. Anyway, enough waffling, on to the ranking. So I'll level with you guys, I haven't played this game in 4 years, and when I did play it I had COVID, so this whole game kind of felt like a fever dream. I really don't remember much outside of a few things. I remember this game being very grindy, which felt a bit weird for a beat 'em up game. I vividly remember driving in the desert area for at least half of my playtime. The combat was actually pretty fun. It was fast and snappy, and the bosses were actually pretty cool. The graphics, nothing to write home about, but they did have like a cool style that was somewhere between Yakuza and anime. The story, from what I remember, was really a big nothing burger and was just like borderline confusing at times. In all fairness, I've never read the manga or watched the anime for the series, so maybe some things just flew over my head that a manga or an anime fan would have gone instantly. But all in all, like, this isn't really a bad game. It's just not a must play, and it's one that I would only recommend to someone who wants to play everything RGG has ever put out. 5 out of 10.
Sweetness, sweetness, I was only joking when I said I'd like to.
As hype as I was for Ishin, and as much as it pains me to put it this low, I kinda have no choice. The game had everything going for it before launch. It was super long awaited. The community had been fiending for Ishin and Kenzan to be localized for years. So to see it have a full-blown remake that was going to be localized was just incredible. So I'll start off with what I enjoyed, which is probably the story. It wasn't incredible, but it was serviceable and did its job. It was also cool to see the characters we know and love as Edo period samurai. The graphics on the new engine looked pretty good, and the game overall had sort of a nostalgic old RGG vibe, which I liked. Now on to the things I didn't like, and to be honest, the big one is the gameplay. The sword combat felt a bit uninspired, which was disappointing, but it's just the one saving grace of a below average RGG game is always the gameplay, but this time I just wasn't feeling it. I also hated the card system. I didn't delve too deep into it on my playthrough just because I was so against it, but I remember seeing clips on Twitter of how easy it was to cheese every single boss fight with these cards, and I was just not a fan at all. I also felt that the game did start a bit slower than usual, which is fair enough because it's a very self-contained game that's extremely detached from the rest of the series, given that it's an Edo period samurai spin-off. But overall, I don't really hate Ishin Kiwami, but I feel like the Unreal Engine wasn't the move. I think RGG have learned and moved on, and they've kind of chalked this off as a failed experiment. 5.5 out of 10.
Too long since we took the time, no one's to blame, I know time flies so quickly.
This one is a weird one because I'm not really rating this as Yakuza 0, which will end up way higher on this list, but as to what new things this game offers. And I will say that this isn't an awful way to play Yakuza 0, but it is far from ideal. The new cutscenes are a mixed bag, and one of the cutscenes is borderline plot ruining. I fully get why this release has been extremely controversial, but there are still some pretty fun new cutscenes, and I think from my point of view, I could just kind of take that one specific cutscene with a grain of salt and kind of just move on with life. But I also do back the criticisms of just letting characters die. The online game mode, Red Light Raid, I can take or leave. In its current state, it's alright, but I think if brought to PC with mod support where we can PvP, then it would be phenomenal. The quality of life features and the performance are probably the biggest selling point. This is the most convenient way to play Yakuza 0, and on top of that, it's portable, so that's pretty cool. Also, this game being $50 on launch is extortionate, when the base game always goes on sale and just is kind of the better way to play Yakuza 0 because you don't get the cutscenes. Overall, it doesn't suck as bad as people make it out to be, but they still do have a very valid point. If all you have is a Switch 2 and you've never played Yakuza before, this is fine, but I'd look up what cutscenes are the added ones just so you can ignore them. 6 out of 10. Dead Souls to me is far and away the weirdest entry in the series. The fact that this game even exists is ridiculous to me. A full-on zombie apocalypse Yakuza game. I guess it kind of makes sense for the time. I mean, franchises like The Walking Dead were kind of at an all-time high in terms of hype, and there was a big demand for zombie media, but I mean, like, Yakuza zombies, like, really? The game translates as well as you think it would. The story is a mess, but it kinda has a really weird charm to it. It was made in the midst of a bunch of the older Yakuza titles, so it has that over-the-top dramatic vibe from the older games that reads almost like a soap opera, which I, for one, love. And the game doesn't really take itself seriously at all, which I think was an absolute necessity for the game to even have a prayer at working. The gameplay is probably the worst in the franchise by a country mile. You can only aim when you're stood completely still, and the aim stick is the left stick. This is just the most bizarre decision they could have made. It does not translate well in practice at all. You just never get used to it. If they were going to make the control scheme this bizarre, the least you'd expect is for them to have some form of aim assist, considering this is everyone's first time playing a shooter where you're aiming with the left stick, but nope. The biggest problem I had with this game is the performance. If this was a stable 30 frames, I wouldn't complain, but like, holy shit, this game just dips into 15 FPS every time anything at all happens. The only way to get 30 FPS consistently is to emulate, but even that isn't the best because the game will just freeze on you randomly and it's super buggy and unplayable. The game is only available to play on the PS3, so I had to shell out $50 a few years ago to get this game physically, which I thought at the time was fucking extortionate, but now the game's going for $90 on eBay. To me, not even close to worth it, not even as a novelty. Still, with all that said, the fact that this game even exists is just a marvel to me, and I can't help but in a weird way love it. But I have to remain fair here. If you're a Yakuza fan, the novelty of playing as Kiryu, Akiyama, Majima, and Goda in a zombie game will not be lost on you, and you will have a lot of fun playing this. Just beware of the awful gameplay and performance. 6 out of 10.
I like to be a pirate's life for me. All my friends are pirates and they sing the BBC.
The newest entry in the franchise as of recording, and all I really have to say about it is it's fun. That's all this game aims to accomplish, and in my opinion, it succeeded. The story is nothing to write home about, very straightforward, and it's fun. Amnesiac Majima kind of allowed RGG to have him be a bit more grounded, which in my opinion added to the game a good amount. The gameplay is one of the best. It's so silky smooth and so fun. It is exactly what you'd expect RGG to pump out in 2025. This game wasn't meant to be much. It's only 5 chapters. It retailed for $50 instead of the industry standard $70. They made it very clear what this game was going to be before they came out with it, which I wholeheartedly respect. The game does start off pretty slow in my opinion, and there is obviously the tutorial fest of chapter 2, but it really did pick up in chapter 3 and lived up to the pirate fantasy that Majima wanted. I thought the very last cutscene in this game was brilliant too, just a complete gut punch in the best way possible, and it did contextualize the story in a really cool way. I did see some takes about this game on various social media sites, and I really don't get them. People say that this game marks the downturn of RGG and how this game narratively ruined Yakuza and such, but people are just reading way too deep into this game in my opinion. It was very clear what this game was meant to be. It executed it well. There isn't that much need to read deep into it. There really isn't much more I could say about Pirate Yakuza. It's just a fun game that feels disassociated from the rest of the games. It's an extended side quest in the best way possible. 7 out of 10. Probably my first controversial pick of the video, but definitely not the last. But Yakuza 1 is simply a good game for me. I say this with the utmost respect for this game's story, because this game came out in the midst of a revolution in video games where games with good stories were only just becoming the mainstream. But the story is just good, in my opinion. The dynamic of Kiryu, Haruka, and Yumi absolutely carry the game. And for those of you who'd argue that that is just the whole story, there's a lot that happens in Yakuza 1 that is just so easy to escape the memory. First of all, Nishiki in this game deserved way more screen time. I feel like the game never really put us in his shoes and showed us how he got this way. We just kind of see him at the start of the game all happy with Kiryu, and then he's just evil and we're out of jail. It is obvious why he was like this, but I feel like a few more cutscenes exploring his side of the story would have really gave me more of an attachment to Nishiki had I not played Zero and Kiwami before this. Then we have Jingu, who just fucking sucks. Like, I can't really sugarcoat it. His character sucks, his boss fight sucks, it's nightmare fuel overall. I will say though, the vibe of this game is immaculate. I love the gameplay, I love how Kamurocho looks and feels in the game, and the OST is 100% better than the Kiwami one in my opinion. It's a real shame they couldn't relicense a bunch of these classic tracks for the remake. Having said all this and having placed the game so low on the list, I have to say, I have a shit ton of respect for this game. This game was a real risk for a company like Sega to put out, and you could tell just by playing this game how much care this game was given and how excited the devs were to be making a game like this. The game is packed to the brim, and for Yakuza fans like myself that started with the Yakuza Zeros and such, I think this is an absolute must play. I have such an attachment to these games that it made me genuinely emotional going through this, knowing this was the start of the franchise I had grown to love so much. But I do have to rate this without any bias. So if I'm being totally fair and honest, this game is a 7.5 out of 10. A lot of my points are pretty much the same for Kiwami as they are for Yakuza 1. I feel like the gameplay and graphics are on par in terms of how I like them with Yakuza 1, but for drastically different reasons. The real difference and the reason why I have this game placed above the original Yakuza 1 is that I thought the added cutscenes with Nishiki drastically changed how I felt about him in the game, and kind of validated me in thinking that more could have been done for Nishiki in the original. Clearly the devs felt the same way, and I think if they weren't trying to make this a completely faithful adaptation, they absolutely would have changed some of the story beats and how the characters acted in some parts of the game with the added context of Yakuza 0 through 5. I will say that the pacing does feel a bit less consistent for some reason in Kiwami compared to the original. The original's pacing felt the same throughout the whole game, but there are parts of Kiwami that feel faster than the original, and there are other parts that feel a bit slower. Overall though, I feel mostly the same about Kiwami as I do with the original, but I slightly prefer it because of how tasteful and character building the new Nishiki cutscenes were. 7.5 out of 10. This one feels pretty harsh to put so low, mainly because of how personal this game is to Kiryu. I think they dealt with his quote-unquote send-off game pretty well, but it's obvious that it did leave things to be desired. First things first, the gameplay and the graphics are the first in the Dragon engine, and it's very good, but still jank. I kind of love how jank this game is. It has a real charm to it, and really felt like Yakuza entering the modern era of video games and kind of out of place and disjointed. I really love the new cast of characters, you know, the small-time Yakuza family, great callback to Yakuza 3. I loved how they ran with how personal Yakuza 5 was and made this game just as personal, if not even more personal. Kiryu is also now looking after Haruka's baby, which made for some of the cutest moments in series history. I love seeing Kiryu's familial side. It really feels like looking at the real him, the version of himself he's been trying to be since the start of the games, but alas, he can never outrun his past. Hokkaido was such a perfect setting for this game too. Really just puts into context that his past will chase him to the ends of the earth and he will be roped in. On to my qualms. First off, the Tojo clan. Look at how they massacred my boy. Every single character in the new Tojo clan just left the worst taste in my mouth. I get that you can't just run with the same people forever and that the times change and that this version of the Tojo is just that, but it's not to my taste at all. Now, my absolute biggest problem with Yakuza 6 is far and away how comedically underwhelming the big finale plot twist was. Like, I finished the whole explanation just waiting for something else and it just never came. It fucking sucked and stands as one of the worst plot points in any Yakuza game in my opinion. Also, another problem with the finale section is that I felt absolutely nothing for the final boss fight, which sucks because those are usually the all-timer moments in any Yakuza game. Thankfully, the cutscenes that follow did hold up that whole section of the game to be an all-timer moment in the series for me, but the boss fight itself was underwhelming. Overall, Yakuza 6 does a lot right and is a serviceable send-off for Kiryu, but there are some things that it didn't do the greatest, and I think the devs picked up on that and realized that Kiryu's send-off needed to be better than this, which is why we got some of the games higher on the list. 7.5 out of 10. Now, to those of you who have watched my first worst to best, this is bound to be a shock because I had this game at number 1 initially. Unfortunately though, a replay of this game 5 years later didn't really do it any favors in my eyes. That's not to say I still don't absolutely love this game, which I do, and that I don't have a bias towards this game, which I absolutely do, but I'm looking at things objectively and this game did fall short. Now, before we delve into the negatives, let me go over what I think this game did well. First of all, having multiple protagonists, such a bold move, and it absolutely paid off. Just in terms of characters, they are, in my opinion, the overall best cast of main playable characters. Akiyama, who kicks this game off, is probably my third favorite character in the series behind Kiryu and Ichiban. Such a heart of gold, painfully relatable, and has such a fun personality. It's so hard not to love him. Then you get Saejima, who's this deeply troubled Yakuza who gave his life up for the sake of his family and is now rotting away in prison. He's stoic, but he deeply cares about those who care about him. Then we have Tanimura, which was very interesting because we're playing as a cop, albeit one that doesn't really play by the rules, but still a cop nonetheless. He's this like edgy, rebellious cop who's just really after the truth on his father's death. And finally, we have Kiryu, who at this stage in the story is just utterly fed up with the Yakuza, but just can never escape it. Honestly, the reason this game fell in the rankings as much as it did is that there is some stern competition in the games. And there are some absolutely goofy decisions in this game that just did not age well at all. I feel like they're well known enough to where I don't really have to bring them up for those trying to watch this without any spoilers, but I absolutely did just completely look past them on my first playthrough and just couldn't the second time around. I also felt that this wasn't the best first impression for Saejima. He really slowed the pace of the game down and had a bit of a messy plot. It was kind of hard to follow at times just because of how much fuckery was happening. Don't get me wrong, a part of me still loves how over the top this game is and how goofy some of the plot twists are. Like, sure, they're not ideal, but now that they're here, I can't help but think they're way too dramatic, and that feels very Yakuza to me. And even outside of that, there's so many genuinely good moments in this game that have aged really well. Notably, Akiyama's plot with Lily, Tanimura's relationship with the detective, Saejima and Yasuko, and Kiryu and the man who stabbed him. But objectively, I just can't rate this game higher than an 8 out of 10. I know this makes it seem like I have a bias against the PS2 versions of 1 and 2, but that really isn't the case. I just have the slightest preference towards Kiwami 2, but I feel like both versions are very good, and there is no definitive version between the two because they are both just classic Yakuza. The gameplay plays the same as Yakuza 1, but now we're in Sotenbori, which made me feel equally emotional to play in PS2 because Kamurocho and Sotenbori are the first two Yakuza maps you're exposed to and easily the two most iconic. And now I've had the privilege of playing them through every single engine and the absolute pleasure of seeing them both in real life, which, by the way, was one of the most insane experiences of my life. It really is one-to-one, and if you guys have the privilege to visit Osaka and Tokyo, you will absolutely know your way around Dotonbori and Kabukicho. Anyways, back to Yakuza 2. The story is just a massive step up from Yakuza 1, in my opinion. This is largely because of Kaoru Sawayama and Ryuji Goda. Kaoru's presence in the game does give this game a K-drama, will they, won't they vibe that just kind of adds to how soap opera the game feels, which I absolutely love. She's also just a badass character and one of the best sidekicks in the games. Now, Ryuji Goda, like Nishiki, is kinda two-dimensional in Yakuza 2, but since he doesn't have history with Kiryu, it plays way better. And his attitude and personality really breathe life into the game. He's a man who lives life by his own conviction and really sticks to it with every decision he makes in this game. Sure, he was brash and a dick a lot of the time, but I can't help but respect him just because of how upfront he is about it. Also, he has one of the coolest final boss fights in series history. It's dramatic, it's epic, and it felt like an absolute spectacle. I loved it. I could keep singing this game's praises all day, and I really don't have anything negative to say about it except for the whole clone situation, which was very goofy in my opinion and felt out of place, but the reason this isn't higher on the list is simply because I just prefer the rest of the games. But this game is quintessentially Yakuza, and the first Yakuza game that pops into my head when I think of what a Yakuza game should be. 8.5 out of 10. Again, all of the points I made with Yakuza 2 hold up here. I just have this edged higher because I really enjoyed the Majima saga. It was short, sweet, and to the point, and it tugged at some heartstrings. Also, unironically, I loved the cabaret story in Kiwami 2. Like, I spent so much time there, and it was really fun. I know it's in Yakuza 0 as well, but this version is slightly better to me. Also, I get that not much could have been done about this on the PS2, but the epic moments in this game really benefit with the Dragon Engine visuals. That said, there still is a charm to the PS2 version that is just undoubtable when you play it, so I can't really say one is definitive, but if I had the choice, I'd probably go for Kiwami 2. 8.5 out of 10. I feel like we've reached a point in the video that I need to mention how much of a super fan I am of the Yakuza games, and that though it might seem harsh to have a game like Yakuza 5 at 8th, it absolutely does not discredit how good I think this game is, and how I completely understand why people think it's the best Yakuza game. I mean, the scope of the game is unlike any other. The story in this game is far more grounded and really deals with the characters going through genuine turmoil in their personal lives instead of some Tojo Clan bullshit. I mean, there is obviously Tojo Clan bullshit in this game, but what Yakuza game is complete without some Tojo Clan bullshit? But the Tojo bullshit isn't the main focus of Yakuza 5. Yakuza 5 deals with real personal struggles of our 5 protagonists and how they're trying to overcome them, which did mark a big shift in the series. And it made it clear to the fans and to the devs that people stopped playing Yakuza games for the Yakuza parts, and we're just here for the characters now. Kiryu, he's lonelier and depressed as ever, having given up his life as he knew it for the sake of his daughter. Saejima finds out that no matter how hard he tries, the people closest to him will always get hurt by association. Haruka, she deals with the real world struggles of becoming an idol and finds herself just as lonely as Kiryu is. Akiyama finds himself wrapped up in another bizarre loan incident that ties him with Haruka and does his best to help Haruka pursue her dream. Shinada finally deals with the traumas of his past head on 20 years later. Like, the game's story beats are seriously incredible. but where the game falls short for me is some of what happens in between. First of all, I have to say, did not care for the main villain of this game. It was obvious from the moment you met him that he was the real overarching villain pulling all the strings, and he's regrettably just one of the many dull and dry villains that RGG have come out with over the years. The gameplay has its hits, has its misses. Kiryu, Akiyama, and Haruka have really great gameplay, and those two parts in particular were my favorite in general. Saijuma's story was really well done in my opinion, and his whole part has actually grown on me a lot since my first playthrough, but I think I just can't look past the gameplay. His moveset is still a step up from Yakuza 4, but like, holy shit, that hunting section is still so awful. There isn't much to it at all in terms of both substance or fun, and the new city that he's in kind of felt rushed. Like, it didn't really have much life to it. And then probably my most controversial take is that I think the Shinada part of the story was just okay. Everything about Shinada, the character, was good and I liked it. Everything else, pretty meh to me. I mean, the plot thread between him and Daigo felt extremely forced. The loan shark I felt nothing for, even though it felt like the game was trying to make him likable towards the end. I just didn't really bite. And his story beats are good, and when he's dealing with himself, it's very good. But there's a lot of padding in his part, and it feels like they knew where they wanted him to end up, but just couldn't really figure out how to get him there naturally. Those are my only real qualms with Yakuza 5. I mean, it does get boring at times, and you do question certain things in the game, but this could be considered the most quintessentially Yakuza game there is. It's a real bridge between the original and modern vibe of the Yakuza games. It has an undeniable quality in its storytelling, and I absolutely love it. Maybe not as much as the others, but I still love it. 8.5 out of 10. This one might shock some of you with it landing this high, but I really do think this game is incredible. It deals with Kiryu's life now that he's abandoned his life for the sake of his loved ones. I can't lie, I was always curious about what Kiryu was up to after Yakuza 6, because no way he'd just be sitting pretty for the rest of his life doing nothing. And the intrigue only intensified after his cameo in Yakuza 7. So having this announced was just so hype for me. And now let me say, I do fully sympathize and respect the opinion of just letting Kiryu be without bringing him back every single game, and to an extent I agree. At this point in time, as of recording, I do not want Kiryu to return in a playable capacity. But that doesn't mean that if he does, I won't hear it out. I understand most of it is a cash grab, but even so, I felt like Gaiden 1 and Infinite Wealth dealt with Kiryu very tastefully, and it did make sense why he was there. And I would say that those two games did wonders for his character in my opinion, no matter what the studio intention behind them was. We'll get to Infinite Wealth later, but as for Gaiden, we kind of see how he was in Yakuza 5. Just as lonely and depressed, but this time, it's a bit different, because he now feels fully convinced that this was the right decision, as opposed to his doubts in Yakuza 5. The game does start off slow, it eases you into the world around Kiryu, or rather Joryu at this point in time. The new cast of characters were surprisingly great. I thought Hanawa, though unlikable at times, had this air of mystery surrounding him, and his dynamic with Kiryu wasn't so black and white as to whether he was friend or foe. Then we have Tsuruno, whose existence is probably just to justify the events of Yakuza 7, and also had a complicated relationship with Kiryu, and surprisingly he had a good bit of personality too. Then we have Nishitani III and Chishido, two characters built with a real classic Yakuza archetype. Nishitani III is a wild card. He's very much like a modern version of the character he's in reference to, being Nishitani from Yakuza 0, and lends himself to some absolutely epic sequences in the game, and he really pushed this game up a gear. Shishido was the surprise standout for me. I won't spoil anything in regards to his character, but he is an even wilder card than Nishitani was, in my opinion. Then we have the entire last chapter of this game, which absolutely felt like a love letter to Kiryu as a character that he ended up receiving in his most broken state thus far. It was devastating and filled with devastating moments. Some might say the ending to this game is cry slop, and to those I'd say I cried, so it worked. Overall, this game is a short and sweet package that doesn't overstay its welcome and has some of the deepest character work in any Yakuza game. I absolutely love this one. 9 out of 10.
What's the story
This one is kind of a big upset because I had it pretty low in my other ranking. I think it was a matter of expectations on the first go around. Yakuza up to that point had been very Yakuza to say the least, so I was kind of expecting more of the same with Yakuza 3 and ended up with Dad Simulator. Now that I've grown deep attachment to Kiryu's character, I have to say this game really took me by surprise on my second playthrough. First off, the orphanage brings out the best side of Kiryu. The Dad Simulator is truly peak, and if anything, I wish there was more of it in this game. Just helping the kids out with their problems and growing a real emotional bond to these kids was a real standout moment in the whole series for me. Then the setting of Okinawa is probably my second favorite behind Kamurocho. It's just such a beautiful setting, and the city is a joy to just walk around in. The combat is where things get a bit iffy for me, and it seems that the community's opinions have also changed throughout the years. Back in my day, I remember it being called Yakuza 3, and now it's just kind of a cardinal sin to speak ill of it, and if you do, you're just a baby who can't play an old game. For me, I think the combat was just fine and could absolutely benefit from a remake. I think it's absolutely fine that kids haven't grown up on the PS2 and the PS3 and aren't used to older games, and I think remakes, in moderation, are a good thing. It translates the classic stories from games we know and love to something that the current generation could also experience, and it really breathes new life into these games. I personally wouldn't go so far as to call Yakuza 3 Blockuza, but to say the gameplay is great, especially when compared to what we have now, is just not true in my opinion. The story is fun, especially the stuff with Mine. I mean, talk about a classic villain. He had his own reasons for doing what he did. He was an absolute dickhead at times, but he had his own brand of righteousness and was suffering in his own way and had his own outlook of the world that was just distorted by his past. Just top tier stuff. Then we have Andre Richardson and the whole Black Monday shtick, which are the most whatever villains in the whole franchise in my opinion, and the plot chapter, which is just a ridiculously funny chapter title when the whole chapter is literally a 30-minute sit down of the plot of the game with some politician that you don't give a shit about. I had initially thought that Yakuza 3 suffered from an identity crisis. Was it a Dad Simulator or was it a Yakuza plot? But like now I kind of realize that's kind of the whole point of the game, and it just completely flew over my head. Kiryu was stuck in two worlds, and no matter how hard he tries, he's just tied to the Yakuza no matter what, but he yearns for his life at the orphanage, which marks Yakuza 3 as kind of an emotional turning point in the series where it explores Kiryu deal with this predicament that will just continue to loom over the rest of his life. It's peak. 9 out of 10. Now we're into the top 5, so all of these games land somewhere in my top 20 of all time, and most land in the top 10. We are treading some serious territory now. So we kick off the top 5 with Judgment, which is Ace Attorney meets Yakuza. It's just as cool as it sounds, and it is absolutely peak. Yagami has to be one of the coolest protagonists RGG have ever made. He has so much swagger, he's rough around the edges, isn't afraid to get his hands dirty, and has far and away the best moveset in all RGG games. Judgment and Lost Judgment are just on another level in terms of combat. The cast of characters are a bunch of fun. You have a great cast of side characters such as Kaito, a lovable knucklehead who just charges in headfirst to any situation. Sugiura, who's this edgy thief turned good guy through truths of his past. Higashi, who's Kaito's friend from his Yakuza days, but has a love-hate relationship with Yagami. You end up with this really weird and cool dynamic between them. The story in Judgment is also really sick. You start the game off by trying to get a guy who seems to be the obvious killer off the hook, but then the question becomes, who really was the killer? It's a really gripping detective drama. I also thought the villains here were just incredible. Hamura in particular was great. The main villain of the game was good, but not great in my opinion. His vibe was off, which I liked. He was a bit off kilter, and I liked how he just kind of crumbled at the end of the game. It was just some legendary copium happening in the last few cutscenes of this game. The detective mechanics in this game are for the most part great and pair well with the mystery plot. Finding the clues is great, chasing is fun. The only thing I didn't really like were the tailing missions, which became mind-numbingly boring after a while. But that's really all I can nitpick with this game. It's incredible. It really has its own identity, completely separate to the Yakuza games, and a very tight, focused, and concise plot that leaves very little to be desired. 9 out of 10. I really don't know how they topped Judgment, but they did. Lost Judgment is just an across-the-board improvement over Judgment, and I think it's hard to argue otherwise. The plot this time is far more intricate, far more moving pieces, and your attention is kind of split between the gang side of the story and the school side of the story. It would have been very easy for the school stuff in this game to come out cheesy and feel like an anti-bullying ad, which it is to an extent, but it was far more endearing and engaging than I thought it would be. Being able to interact with the school to the level that you can, with there being side quests and clubs and other stuff you could do inside the school, really formed a bond and gave the school an identity and a life that's easy to connect with as the player. Of course, this is still RGG we're talking about, so the crime side of this story is also just incredible, with one of my favorite villains in their history. The game is really easy to connect with on an emotional level, which I'd say I value more than the intricate plot of the first Judgment, which is why I have it ranking higher. There were some cool new mechanics this time around, such as the stealth mechanics and the parkour, and the tailing, thank God, was kept to an absolute minimum, which I really appreciated. Above all else, this game's combat is just the best RGG have ever done. It's going to be incredibly hard to top what they did in Lost Judgment. Overall, this game is absolutely fantastic, and it pains me that we probably won't get another Judgment game. These games are up there with some of the best RGG games ever made, and they really freshened up the RGG game cycle, so it's sad to see them go, but god damn if they didn't go out with a bang. 9.5 out of 10. There isn't much to say about Yakuza 0 that hasn't been parroted a million times over. There's a reason why it's so beloved and why it served as such a fantastic entry into the series. It's ground zero for Kiryu and Majima, the two series titans up to this point, and it showed them in a light they'd never been seen in before. Majima especially, who absolutely stole the show in Yakuza 0. No one was expecting him to be like this and to have a past like this. I mean, there really isn't anything about Yakuza 0 that you could poke at. The game brims with personality, humor, drama, heart, personalities, and most of all, content. There is so much fucking content in this game. To this day, I have never 100%ed Yakuza 0. It is far too daunting a task. You could pour 100 hours into this game and still have another 100 worth of shit to do. It's just mind-boggling to me how much they packed into little old Kamurocho and Sotenbori. This game for me really marked a turning point in the writer's room, because this is a story of such immensely high quality that only the experience of years of making these games could give. It's a brilliantly made conspiracy plot that never loses your focus, even with the mountain of distractions scattered across the map. You just severance your way back into the plot like nothing happened. They really pushed the boundaries of what side content they could get away with in Yakuza 0, and they treaded such a fine line so perfectly. I could never say a bad thing about this game, and I could never argue an opinion saying it's the best Yakuza game, because what can you even say to that? It's perfect. Nothing could have been added or removed to improve this experience. It's a game I owe a lot to. I really like playing games, and it's a big part of my life. And this experience opened up a world of some of the best games I've ever played that have made long-lasting impressions on myself. So I really feel passionate about Yakuza 0, and I don't think it'll ever get old for me. 10 out of 10. I hate that this game is controversial to some, because to me this game brought out emotions that I had never felt before while playing a game. I'll save you the talk about how great the gameplay and the graphics and whatever are, because while all those things are fucking incredible, this game at its core is about Kiryu and Ichiban. It's about getting back up again. It's about wearing your heart on your sleeve, embracing your past, moving forward with life, even if it's with a mountain's worth of weight on your shoulder, because life stops for no one. It's about camaraderie, friendship, brotherhood, unlikely relationships, and above all else, it's about the human condition to love. I don't care that there are some weird plot points. I don't care if the villains in this game weren't the best, because it's not about them at all. It's about accepting the situation you're in and moving forward with love in your heart. And that alone just speaks to me so dearly and really changed my outlook on certain parts of my life. I also feel like I need to talk about Kiryu in this game, as he is my favorite character in video games, so to see him here just felt surreal. This is the first time we've seen Kiryu noticeably age, almost like he's lived an entire lifetime since we last saw him. And finally, after 8 games, we see him take a second to just smell the roses. It was gut-wrenching. You see him trying to tie up the loose ends of his life, and it's just absolutely gut-wrenching. You see him not shoulder a burden for himself for the first time in his life, and it's the happiest you've ever seen him outside of his orphanage. His last 2 scenes in this game felt like the biggest punch in the gut. To see him like that, yet so in control of himself, was such a poetic ending to the game. Like I said earlier with Lost Judgment, I value emotions in games above all else. And fuck if this game didn't move me like no other game. 10 out of 10. Talk about an experience. Yakuza Like a Dragon is about Ichiban Kasuga's past and coming to terms with it. Ichiban is the most kind-hearted, passionate, full of joy and hope character I've ever played as in a video game. Most video games have you playing as the stoic hero type, but Ichiban really carved his own way of being a hero. He embraced his ragtag group of friends as if they were family. He forgave people who were responsible for him losing half of his life with the biggest smile on his face. And even when it seems that people he was once close to have become the absolute worst of the worst, he reached his hand out to pick them back up again. I know this is fictional, and I know it's just a story about some made-up guy, but like, how can you not connect with that? How can you not be enthralled at how much in love with life he is? He just wears his heart on his sleeve. It's something that really connected with me emotionally, as someone who tends to suppress some of his emotions, as someone who at times failed to let people know how much they meant to me, and just really as a person just trying my best to get through life. No one is perfect, and we all have pasts that haunt us to some extent, but to know that you could really build your life from anything, and that you can move forward with the cards you were dealt with, is such a powerful message that the story of Yakuza Like a Dragon dedicates itself to, and it did so absolutely perfectly, in my opinion. So that's the Yakuza Worst to Best 2025. We went over 19 games. It was daunting replaying a lot of these games, I'm not gonna lie, but fully worth it. I mean, this franchise is just kind of like no other. There's nothing really out there like Yakuza. An entire 19 game franchise that just sticks true to itself and just does some of the best crime stories you've ever played, and over the recent years has grown a real emotional maturity in their writing that rivals some of the best TV shows and movies, in my opinion. Like, I look at these games that highly, and I'm so grateful I ended up playing these games. So yeah, let me know your rankings in the comments. Let me know what you disagreed with, what you agreed with, all that stuff. Thank you guys for watching to the end. I know this was a bit of a long video, but I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.